November 5th, 2024. While the major networks were cautiously hedging every sentence, millions of people weren't watching CNN. They were watching a number, a single percentage on a website called Polymarket. And that number, that one probabilistic guess from a crowd of strangers betting real money, was moving faster and more accurately than anything the professionals were producing. By midnight, Polymarket had one candidate above 95%. The networks were still saying too close to call. Reporters were getting their election results from gamblers. Financial journalists were citing odds instead of exit polls. And nobody seemed to notice how insane that was. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care because it was working. So here's the real question. Are prediction markets accurate? We'll get there. The real question is, what does it mean when the most reliable signal about our collective future comes from people betting real money on it? Is this wisdom of crowds? Gambling in a lab coat? A very sophisticated dopamine trap? I think it might be all three, simultaneously. And that should bother you a little. Polymarket launched in 2020. It's a decentralized prediction market built on blockchain, operating out of regulatory gray zones, letting users buy and sell shares and outcomes. Will this candidate win? Will this law pass? Will this CEO get fired? Each share pays out $1 if the thing happens, 0 if it doesn't. The price of the share is the market's probability estimate. 70 cents means 70% likely. Simple, brutally simple. This isn't a new concept. Political betting was massive in America right up until the 1940s. Newspapers would print the odds. The Iowa electronic markets ran academic prediction markets through the 80s and 90s and consistently outperformed polls. The theory goes all the way back to Friedrich Hayek. Prices aggregate dispersed knowledge better than any single expert ever could, because every price is a vote, except the vote costs something. Polymarket didn't invent any of this. They just put it on the internet, added crypto, and waited for journalists to act surprised. Here's what makes prediction markets fundamentally different from a poll, a pundit, or your friend who has a feeling about the game. Skin in the game. If you're wrong, you lose money. That single fact creates an incredibly powerful filter. It weeds out the overconfident, the uninformed, the politically motivated. It doesn't eliminate bad predictions, but it taxes them heavily. And that tax changes behavior in ways that nothing else really does. So who's actually on these platforms? It's not just degenerate gamblers, though there are definitely some of those, and they are not hard to find. There are professional traders, policy wonks, intelligence analysts, academics, and journalists who cite the odds publicly while pretending they don't personally have positions. And then there are regular people who watch way too much news and decided their strong opinions should at least have the dignity of a financial instrument. The mix matters. A diverse participant pool is theoretically the whole point. The question is whether diversity of background beats out uniformity of worldview. Spoiler, sometimes it doesn't. Now, here's a concept that separates serious forecasting from noise calibration. A well-calibrated predictor is one where, when they say something has a 70% chance of happening, it happens about 70% of the time. Not 100%, not always, just 70%. Sounds obvious, but it's shockingly rare. Weather forecasters are actually pretty good at this. Political pundits are catastrophically bad. Where do prediction markets land? That's the whole ballgame. And the data is more interesting than you'd expect. Philip Tetlock spent 20 years studying expert predictions. His conclusion? Most experts, the kind you see on cable news with fancy titles, perform barely better than random chance on long-range forecasts. The dart-throwing chimp famously outperforms the average pundit, but a specific subset of people Tetlock called super forecasters, people who update constantly, think probabilistically, and actively track their own accuracy. Those people are genuinely better. Prediction markets are, in theory, a mechanism for surfacing exactly those people. Before we get to wins and losses, one more concept you need: liquidity. A prediction market is only as good as the volume of money flowing through it. Low liquidity means one whale can move the entire number. It means a 73% probability might actually represent 4 guys with strong opinions and access to a crypto wallet, not the aggregated wisdom of thousands. Polymarket has more liquidity than anything that came before it, but it's still not the stock market. And that gap matters more than most people realize. Remember this when I tell you what happened in October 2024. All right, evidence. Let's start with the wins because there are real ones. The Iowa electronic markets ran from 1988 through multiple election cycles. In 15 out of 19 elections, they outperformed national polls in the final days before the vote. Not by a little, by a statistically meaningful margin. These were real money markets with actual stakes, run by academics who wanted to see if Hayek's prices information idea held up in practice. It held up. Embarrassingly well, actually, for the polling industry. More recently, the Elon buys Twitter saga. When Musk made his initial offer in April 2022, prediction markets immediately started pricing in a high probability the deal would collapse. Why? Because the market participants were watching his behavior. The erratic tweets, the bot excuse, the waffling, and updating accordingly. Meanwhile, financial journalists were writing very serious articles about deal structures. The markets were saying, this guy is going to try to back out. Months before he actually tried to back out, they weren't perfect, but they were ahead. Here's a wild one. In 2003, DARPA, yes, the U.S. military research agency, proposed something called the policy analysis market. The idea was to let traders bet on geopolitical events, coups, terrorist attacks, assassinations. The logic was sound. If someone knows something, money will surface it. Congress lost their minds. 2 senators called it grotesque and morally repugnant. The program was killed within 24 hours. The people who killed it didn't explain what their alternative was for aggregating hard intelligence, presumably vibes. Now for a loss. A real one. COVID origins. In early 2020, prediction markets were pricing lab leak at somewhere around 20 to 25%. The natural origin hypothesis dominated not just in markets, but everywhere. Fast forward 2 years, the FBI, the Department of Energy, and multiple intelligence assessments all shift toward lab leak as the more likely origin. The markets weren't wildly wrong, but they followed consensus rather than leading it, which is exactly what they're not supposed to do. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. Brexit. June 2016. Prediction markets had remained winning at roughly 75 to 80% on the morning of the vote. The actual result? Leave won by 4 points. This was not a close call that went the wrong way. This was the markets being confidently, expensively wrong. Millions of pounds traded on a number that turned out to be garbage. And the reason is fascinating. The bettors were disproportionately wealthy, educated, London-based people who simply could not imagine that Leave would win. Skin in the game doesn't fix demographic blind spots. It just makes them more expensive. And then October 2024 happened. A single anonymous trader, possibly multiple coordinated accounts, poured somewhere between $30 and $45 million into Polymarket betting on one candidate. The market moved. The probability shifted. Financial news ran headlines about what the market was saying. What the market was actually saying was, someone with a very large wallet has a very strong opinion, and now it's your problem too. This is what low liquidity manipulation looks like when it goes mainstream. And here's the worst part. Even if that trader was right, you can no longer tell if the market price reflected wisdom or just money volume. The signal had been eaten by the noise from the inside. And then there's the stuff that makes everyone uncomfortable. What happens when prediction markets create perverse incentives? The assassination market thought experiment has been floating around since the 90s. If you could bet on when a political figure dies, you'd have a financial incentive to make that happen sooner rather than later. Polymarket has actually had to navigate real versions of this problem. Markets on when certain leaders would be removed from power, where the line is between forecasting and incentivizing. That's not a theoretical question anymore. So here's the score after the evidence round. Prediction markets are genuinely, measurably better than polls and pundits on many questions, especially elections with high liquidity and clear resolution criteria. They fail when the participant pool is too homogeneous, liquidity is too low, someone with enough money decides to editorialize with their wallet, or when the question is so politically charged that even financial incentives can't overcome motivated reasoning. That's not nothing. But it's also not the oracle some people want it to be. But here's the part that nobody in the prediction market hype cycle wants to sit with. What happens when the market stops being a mirror and starts being a cause? Because there's a version of this where Polymarket showing 80% for a candidate doesn't just reflect reality. It shapes it. Donors see momentum. Volunteers get demoralized or energized. Media narratives shift. The prediction becomes an input to the very event it's trying to predict. The thermometer starts changing the temperature of the room. And suddenly, the whole model collapses on itself. This isn't theoretical. There's actually a name for it in economics. The performativity problem. The act of measuring something changes the thing being measured. Financial markets figured this out decades ago. If everyone canoes a stock will be added to the S&P 500, they buy it in advance, the price rises, and the prediction makes itself true. Prediction markets have the same vulnerability, but pointed at elections, geopolitical events, and public health decisions. The confidence interval on your forecast now needs to include the forecast itself. That's the kind of recursion that makes statisticians reach for the bourbon. Now let's talk about gaming the system. Because people absolutely game the system. And here's the genuinely funny part, some of the gaming is technically legal. If you're a political operative and you know your candidate is about to announce something big, a major endorsement, a VP pick, a scandal about to drop, and you buy contracts on Polymarket before that announcement, is that insider trading? Legally? Probably not. These aren't securities. There's no SEC. The regulatory apparatus for this doesn't really exist yet. Congratulations. You found a stock market with no rules for people who actually know things. And here's where the theory completely inverts on itself. The whole point of prediction markets is that informed traders will correct the uninformed ones. Skin in the game weeds out the noise. But what if the most informed person in the market is a campaign staffer, a government official, someone who knows something they're not supposed to know publicly? Suddenly, the market price isn't wisdom of crowds. It's a leak detector. A very expensive, very public leak detector. And the signal you're getting isn't aggregate judgment. It's one very plugged-in person hedging their knowledge, which, depending on your perspective, is either brilliant or deeply corrupt. But the gaming gets even more elegant, or horrifying, pick your word. Here's the loop. Journalist writes article citing Polymarket odds. Polymarket users read that article. Market moves in response. Journalist writes follow-up article about the market moving. More users pile in. Market moves again. And now you've got a self-referential system where this signal is partly just the echo of people reacting to coverage of themselves reacting. It's the financial equivalent of two mirrors facing each other. Infinite reflections, none of them the original image. And the New York Times is breathlessly reporting on reflection number 7. Okay, let me give you the sports version of this, because it's the same problem with a punchline attached. Legal sports betting in America exploded after 2018. Prediction markets for games, player stats, live and play betting on every pitch and free throw. And within about 18 months, every major sports league had a quiet crisis on their hands. Not because fans were gambling, leagues love that actually, because referees started making calls that conveniently moved betting lines, not allegations, documented patterns, statistically anomalous outcomes on specific calls by specific officials. The market found the corruption before the league did. Congratulations, prediction markets. You're a corruption detector now. Unclear if that was the plan. So step back. Step all the way back. Because here's what prediction markets have actually shown us. Not about the future, but about ourselves. Every failure mode we've identified isn't a market failure. It's a human failure that the market made visible. The demographic blindness of Brexit? That's not a market bug. That's the revealed preferences of who had enough money and motivation to participate. The whale manipulation? That's concentrated power doing what concentrated power always does. The media feedback loop? That's our desperate need to make uncertainty feel resolved. The market didn't create these problems. It just put a price tag on them. Here's the thing that nobody in this conversation, the boosters or the critics, wants to say out loud. Prediction markets are the most honest thing we've ever built. Not because they're accurate, because they can't lie about what we value. A poll can be biased by question framing. A pundit can be wrong without consequence. An algorithm can be tuned to tell you what you want to hear. But a prediction market? You put your money where your mouth is, or you don't. And when millions of people do that simultaneously, you get something rare, a collective statement of belief that actually costs something to make. That's not wisdom, that's not an oracle, that's a confessional, with a ticker. And that's what makes people so uncomfortable when markets get things wrong. It's not embarrassment about a bad forecast. It's the sudden awareness that the collective model of reality that millions of people bought into with real money, under real incentives to be right, was still wrong. That's not reassuring. That's terrifying. It means our best mechanism for aggregating knowledge across millions of people still fails systematically when the question touches something we're collectively unwilling to see. Brexit happened because enough of England felt left behind that they voted for chaos, and the prediction market couldn't price that in because the people betting on it had never felt left behind a day in their lives. So what's the prescription? I'll give you 3 things, and then I want to circle back to November 5th, because that's where this ends. 1, Use prediction markets as any input, not the input. They're a signal. Read them like you'd read a thermometer. Useful, not authoritative. 2. Pay attention to when markets are thin. Low volume numbers are not consensus. They're just the loudest voices who happen to have money that day. 3. Watch what markets can't price. The things that don't move the needle. Human dignity, grief, rage, solidarity. Those are the things that turn 75% probabilities into wrong answers on election night. November 5th, 2024. That number on Polymarket, the one that was moving faster than the networks. Here's the thing I didn't tell you at the beginning. It was right, but being right doesn't settle the question, because the number didn't understand why it was going to be right. It didn't understand the kitchen table conversations, the fury, the fear, the exhaustion. It just watched money move and updated accordingly. It was a perfect instrument for measuring collective human belief, while being completely blind to what was driving that belief. Like a seismograph that can tell you an earthquake is coming, but has absolutely nothing to say about why the tectonic plates shifted. So, are prediction markets the future of how we understand the world? Maybe. Are they a sophisticated gambling operation dressed up in the language of epistemology? Also maybe. Both things can be true at the same time, which is deeply uncomfortable and also kind of the point. The real question, the one that actually matters for the next decade, is whether we're smart enough to use them as tools without mistaking the tool for the truth. We built a machine that turns collective belief into a number. That's genuinely remarkable. What we haven't built yet is the wisdom to know what that number is telling us. And that gap between the signal and the understanding isn't a market problem. It never was. It's a human one. It always was. And no amount of liquidity is going to fix that.